Well, let's be fair. Well, let's be fair to Rick. I mean, Rick has spent the better part of the last year and a half running for president on his campaign. He just endorsed this last night, so I wouldn't expect him to be entirely familiar with my record and my time. Bottom line is, I'm proud of my service of public record. We have real achievements, not just in the U.S. Senate, but in my time as Speaker of the House and as a state legislator.
That was Florida Senator Marco Rubio defending Rick Santorum for having a tough time naming his political accomplishments. Rubio's political accomplishments. In a recent interview, Santorum endorsed Rubio after dropping out of the race earlier this week. But as I said, there was a bit of a struggle to come up with some of the accomplishments of Marco Rubio. So we welcome the former presidential candidate, Rick Santorum, to the program now. Good morning. Good to see you this morning, Senator.
Thank you. Good to see you, Martha.
Let me start by saying, because I haven't seen you since you dropped out of the race, that you always brought a lot of substance and a lot of thought and a lot of experience to the conversation in this political race. So we thank you for that and
thank you. I was always very prepared for that. I wasn't necessarily prepared to have done my case study on Marco Rubio's accomplishments, and I was aware of some things, and I mentioned actually some things during that interview which seemed to have gotten glossed over that I actually did mention an accomplishment. But nevertheless, the reason I endorsed him, frankly, was because this is a man who has the right vision for the country. It's a vision that I talked about, and as someone who's prepared to be commander-in-chief. Those are the things that got me to gravitate toward Marco Rubio. He's got experience. Really, after I said we had the most experience, and I think we did, but Marco Rubio had, I would say, the second most experience. This guy who served on the Armed Services Committee, served on the it's not Armed Services, Foreign Affairs Committee, and also on the on Intelligence, and has had it right. I mean, he talks about the problem of fundamentalist Islam. He is very clear about that. He's very clear about the threat that radical Islam, and he's actually talk about accomplishments, passed something to try to curb Hezbollah and put sanctions on Hezbollah. Those are the things that I'm really looking for. Does he has a positive vision for America, which I think he does, particularly focused on the American worker, which is something I care about, and I think a lot of Republicans are beginning to understand if we aren't the party of the American worker, we're not going to be successful as a country, much less as a party. And secondly, someone who is a strong leader on the whole national security issue and has experience in that area, because I said all the time that Commander-in-Chief is not an entry-level position, and he's the only one left in this field that has that kind of experience.
All right. So I understand, the things that went into some of your decision. You know that on Saturday night, Marco Rubio is going to be pressed on what you are calling and what his campaign is calling his accomplishments. They're going to say that he didn't play a big role in, sort of ending the money that was going to insurance companies and Obamacare, that the Washington Post gave that Pinocchios. They're going to poke into each one of these accomplishments. So I ask you to, again, do you see a real record of accomplishment? And if you don't think that's important, why don't you think that's important?
Well, I'd say a couple things. If you look at his record as a speaker, one of the things that I was most impressed of was his, number one, he cut taxes and led the charge on cutting taxes when he was the speaker, when actually he had the ability to get something done. He was in a leadership role and showed that he could bring people together and pass a tax cut. Secondly, his work on private property rights. One of the things we tried to do when I was in the United States Senate was respond to the Supreme Court Kelo decision, and they actually did something in Florida, and he provided that leadership. As I said yesterday in the interview, one of the big problems in Washington is it's a dysfunctional place. Nothing gets done right now. And you can't say that, well, nothing happened, nothing happened for the first 4 years he was there because Harry Reid wouldn't allow anything to be voted. He just shut down the United States Senate. And what we need is someone who actually has a track record, and you look at his leadership in the Florida legislature, of actually bringing people together. One of the things I read when I was doing a little background work on him before I endorsed was that he was criticized by Democrats in Florida as being this crazy, right-wing conservative. At the same time, they said, well, but he's someone you can work with. Right, that's what we need. We need a principled conservative that can work with.
But I'm just curious, when you look at somebody like Chris Christie or a Jeb Bush or a John Kasich, the governors are arguing that they have been tested in a way that the candidate that you're supporting has not, and that they've had to make the tough decisions in the executive position as a governor in their states, and they're arguing that that's better experience. You chose not to pick one of them, and I wonder why.
Yeah, national security to me it trumps everything when it comes to, and not to use the word Trump, I guess, in the wrong way, but it does trump everything when it comes to the issue of the presidency. I mean, Marco is someone who has experience and has a very clear vision, and someone who has been very clear about not mixing words on the fact of we're dealing with radical Islam, someone who has been clear and actually passed things to put sanctions on some of these radical Islamic groups. Yeah. That to me is important, having that kind of national security experience, and particularly with respect to Islam. As you know, that is the #1 issue that we're facing, the issue of Iran, the issue of ISIS, and having someone with that experience to me was very important.
We're about to get cut off. Senator Santorum, thank you very much. Good to see you, sir.
My pleasure.